Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 59th call of the Amazon Investor Coalition. This is a weekly call and podcast series dedicated to advancing forest-friendly economic development, the rule of law across the Amazon region of South America. This week, we're meeting Beto Borges and Forest Trends. Forest Trends is a pioneer, to put it mildly, in this place of advancing forest-friendly economic development globally. And Beto's one of the leaders in this place globally. So Beto, welcome. Please introduce yourself to us. And I think you might have a presentation.
Thank you, Jonah. Greetings, everyone. Glad to see some friends here. Hey, Lars and other friends. Happy to be here. An honor to be part of this ongoing, exciting reflections in relation to the conservation of the Amazon, and most importantly, at least from our perspective, the well-being of the indigenous peoples and other local communities that live in the region. So happy to be here, Jonah. I think that I have some slides that perhaps we can walk through them, and then we have some time for questions. How do we envision the presentation to go?
Yeah, let's start with the slides. That sounds great. Go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. You see my screen?
Yeah, looks good.
Right. So let's. So, do you continue to see it?
Yeah, it's full screen. It's good.
Okay. So forgive me for perhaps rushing through it a bit because there's lots of content. But yeah, I run Forest Trends Communities and Territorial Governance Initiative. I've been working with indigenous peoples for about 30 years or so. I'm Brazilian. And with Forest Trends, I've been with Forest Trends for the past 15 years, directing the Communities and Territorial Governance Initiative program. I think it's already, this audience already familiar with the stewardship role of indigenous peoples globally, and here just a sample of that, of the impact that indigenous peoples have with their traditional stewardship of their territories. Just in the Amazon alone, we're talking about 210 million hectares approximately, where indigenous peoples have their forest homelands. As you can see in the light green and the map here, the sort of the circle map, are indigenous territories in Brazil alone. So, and you see the extent of indigenous territorial coverage in Brazil, which is roughly between 15 to 17%. Indigenous lands already demarcated. There are about twice that much still in the claims by indigenous peoples to be demarcated. And this is an old picture here of 1986, but even back then, you can see the extent of devastation here in between the two territories, the Kayapó and Xicrim do Catete, which is evidence of this data here that the deforestation rate in indigenous peoples is about 0.8% as compared to other protected areas, and about 11 times greater than non-protected areas, which represents an estimate 42 to 50 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in terms of greenhouse gas emissions avoidance. Not sure if this top bar here is blocking the full vision of the slides, but what it says here, Communities and Territorial Governance Initiative. The program, it's in place for the past 20 years at Forest Trends. The Communities Initiative, that's when it first started. The organization itself has about 25 years. The origin of this program, some of you may be familiar with the Rights and Resources Initiative. That actually was incubated within the Communities Initiative at Forest Trends. That's when I first came in, when Rights and Resources Initiative was launched, incubated out of Forest Trends, and then the Communities and Territorial Governance Initiative was born as it is today. So, and the our focus, whereas Rights and Resources Initiative focus on land tenure rights for indigenous peoples and local communities, we work on the governance aspect of that, of working with indigenous peoples and local communities through advocacy, economic self-determination, and cultural integrity. In the area of advocacy, what we've been working on over the years is really to both support indigenous peoples in their claim to so that their rights to their territories can be considered in evolving policy around low rural emission development policy, as well as the flow of climate finance to indigenous to jurisdictional programs or other programs throughout. We focus in Latin America, in this case in the Amazon. We believe that not at all, the flow of climate finance has been very, hasn't really achieved territories, indigenous peoples and local communities territories in areas where you have the so-called additionality, and even less in areas where you have high forest and low deforestation. We did a study a few years ago where we reviewed some of the REDD commitments, and out of $1.2 billion at the time, only 378 million was disbursed in 7 tropical countries, and no significant amount was really reported to benefit indigenous peoples directly. So the work that we do in the space of advocacy is really supporting indigenous peoples' organizations, both their political organizations as well as territorial-based organizations, to drive more climate finance and to respect their territorial rights. This is a capacity building program that we have working with indigenous organizations at the territorial level in particular, to support their advocacy efforts, as well as economic self-determination, cultural integrity. Jonah, if you could please share the link to that program with the audience, I would appreciate it that I shared with you earlier.
Sure, coming up.
In the area of economic resilience, the work that we do is really to seek to strike the right balance between indigenous people's traditional economies with that of the market economy. And in this way, we've been working with different partners. In this case here, we just launched this 1 million trees in the Amazon indigenous lands reforestation program, working in some selected indigenous territories in what we call the Tupi Mosaic, is about 1.5 million hectares indigenous corridor in the states of Rondônia and Mato Grosso. We're working with the Xingu Seeds Network, Ecoporé, and with support from the Arbor Day Foundation in order to plant 1 million trees. It's the first phase of this program that we have, seeking to increase carbon storage, support biodiversity, as well as increase food security and invest in some of the community-based non-timber forest products enterprise, such as producing acai, Brazil nuts, cocoa, babaçu, among other non-timber forest products. We've also been working with this project with the support of USA through the Partners for the Amazon program, where we are working with 8 indigenous territories, as you can see here within this Tupi Mosaic, to support the development of community-based enterprises based on the sustainable value chain of rainforest, non-timber forest products. Those are the selected indigenous territories, as you can see in the small in the square here to the right. This is another example of the work that we're doing in the space of supporting indigenous economy, really to support their economic resilience over time in order to reduce their vulnerability to the unsound economic pressures that border their lands. As you can see in this map here, the extent of deforestation surrounding all these indigenous territories here in the Igarapé Lourdes, all the brown, dark brown, and are the indigenous areas where we've been working. And you can see that they're surrounded by deforestation, mostly cattle ranching and soy plantation in this part of the Amazon. The Canopy Bridge is a partnership that we developed with Ecodecision that you can see here. At that time, this was supported with funds from USAID, and later we had some funding from NICFI for this program. And we partnered with COICA as well as Environmental Defense Fund. And what we did here was really a map of indigenous enterprises or community-based community businesses. Oops, well, I went too far. Go back. Previews. Sorry about that. And where we mapped about 126 indigenous enterprises in 5 countries in the Amazon, and which we were able to confirm that about 83 of those enterprises has been located in the boundaries of buffer zones of 33 protected areas and 60 legally recognized indigenous territories covering approximately 105 million hectares, which is again another evidence of the stewardship of indigenous peoples. And by strengthening their economies, we in turn are protecting large extenses of the Amazon. So this initiative is connected with another program that we have, which is the Kumari. If you may also please share that link, that will give the audience more detail on that. But the Kumaris is a program, as a partnership between Forest Trends and Ecodecision, where we partner with chefs throughout the Amazon. Most of them so far are based in Lima, with producers from indigenous communities so that can supply them with gourmet products from the forest, so that can in turn support the community's economies. In the area of culture, what we call, oh, I did it again. In the area of supporting cultural integrity, we've been working with indigenous partners in launching this, what we call the Living Pharmacy Program. The Living Pharmacy Program provides resources, financial resources to selected indigenous communities to work, wherein indigenous elders who still have the knowledge of medicinal plant use travel deep in the forest with the younger generation that have an interest to learn about how to identify, cultivate, and use, and most importantly, use those medicinal plants to go into deep in the forest and bring back to their villages plants that have medicinal properties to use for their own use. This is not for the use of outsiders, but for their own use. This is an example of that. Is one of those projects that we did with the Yawanawa people in Acre, in Brazil. These are 17 medicinal plants that are used just for the treatment of poisonous snake bites. The description of those, how to use those plants, are in the Yawanawa language. And here is just, I did some other description in Portuguese, but sort of the secret, if you will, on how to use those plants remain with them. And these were kind of big posters that we would produce that were distributed throughout the villages in order for them to also be able to better identify those particular plants. And in the history of the Yawanawa people, because of this traditional knowledge of medicinal plants, there have never been a death as a result of poisonous bites.
He's muted.
So, and to the side here, just a little example of the work that we've been doing with indigenous women, supporting their artisan work. And we have a partnership with Tucum and other companies in order to create income streams for indigenous women in order to develop their artisan work and bring it to the marketplace. So bypassing just quickly some of the results so far in our work, this work that we've been doing with indigenous women, was mostly supported by the IKEA Foundation. We've managed to raise the income level by 10%, which may sound a small number, but locally it goes a long way. We also managed to work with some jurisdictions in order to drive finance from, for instance, from jurisdictional programs such as the CISA in Acre, where they received funding from the Red Early Movers program, and we were involved in the setting of the indigenous sub-program for CISA, creating the benefit sharing system or guidelines for indigenous peoples in the state of Acre to receive funding. And we also, Forest Trend, some years ago, about 8-9 years ago, we launched with the Surui people and other partners the first ever Red Plus project with indigenous peoples as protagonists. And we were able to sell carbon credits that were double verified by VCS, the Volume Carbon Standard at the time, and CCBA, the Climate Community Biodiversity Alliance, a gold standard at the time. In our site, if you may please share our site, Jonathan, you will see several of our publications. We have now more than 50 publications. Most of them, the great majority, 95% of our publications are meant for a community audience in these 3 areas of our work, which are advocacy, economic resilience, and cultural integrity. These are some of our main partners to date. We work very closely with organizations on the ground. That is really part of the DNA of Forest Trends. The work that we do is really through a participatory approach. These are some of the names of the different organizations. Agir in Brazil, Confenhar in Ecuador, and so on and so forth. IDECEP, OPIAC in Peru and Colombia, and so on. These are, in the course of this 15 years, we've been working with most of these, with all of these organizations that are here and others that I didn't include. These are on the top are our implementing partners, whereas down below, some of our funding base to date and some universities that have also been supporting our work as well. And really where we continue to focus and oops, Jesus, again, oh, now it made it even worse. One more time.
You're good.
And we continue to focus our work really to consolidate, work in support of indigenous and local communities to consolidate their territorial governance through institutional strengthening, the support that we can provide to their organizations, as well as leadership and planning, work in partnership with territorial-based organizations in particular to strengthen their economies through incubating support for local enterprises. We support their advocacy efforts to continue to engage with governments and the private sector in order to secure their rights and access to finance and recognition of their rights within the jurisdictions that they are located in. For instance, we've been collaborating a lot with organizations in the space of the LEAF program that I believe we can talk more about that during the questions. It's a new program that has been launched by the US, Norway, and England with a cluster of corporations in order to drive climate finance to jurisdictional programs to reduce emissions. So we've been working with indigenous organizations that have not really been consulted, and as that program is launched, you know, there's still a lot to be done in order for them to really benefit. So we provide some of our understanding being in the space of ecosystem services for quite some time. For instance, Forest Trends just launched recently this publication, the state of the art of the voluntary carbon market. And so we've been monitoring the voluntary carbon market, and as a result, we believe we can support, and we have been asked by our indigenous partners to help them think through how to better advocate for their rights as programs such as LEAF get developed, get underway. And another area that we've been doing some work with our indigenous partners, really to think through new ways of measuring, if you will, their stewardship of the ecosystem services within their territories, in order to hopefully think out of the box, out of the different standards that exist. So we think that it's important for indigenous peoples to come up with their own culturally appropriate ways through which their stewardship of their forests can be recognized and recognized and supported by bilaterals, by NGOs, by the international community as a whole. So, and I will stop here. That is my email. I will be really happy to be in touch with those of you that we're not in touch yet. That is just one of our sites. And yeah, so I guess.
Great. If you could end the screen share, great. Thank you so much, Beto. There's a lot there. There's so much there. Any one of those could lead to an hour-long presentation in and of itself. So I'm just going to come in with a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to others. Others who would like to ask questions, I encourage you to make your interest known by raising your hand or putting something in the chat. First question, Beto. I would like you to walk us through a little bit about the role of the private sector in indigenous territorial recognition. So I know that you help establish spaces for indigenous communities and governments to dialogue. What about the private sector? What is their role in that process specifically?
In our case, well, that's a big question, right? Depends what you mean on the role of the private sector.
Yeah, sorry, too big. Take what you want.
Yeah, well, the private sector that is destroying the environment, the role that we have is to support indigenous partners to really seek to halt the incursion of unsustainable development in their territories. The spectrum of the private sector that it's awakened to the importance of working with and supporting indigenous peoples. There are many companies that see it differently. We work in two areas, I guess, in relation to private sector to date. One is when I said earlier that we seek to strike the right balance between indigenous people's traditional economies with that of the marketplace. And the marketplace, that is where these private companies are, such as Veraca and Original Beans and other companies that are that already buy products from non-timber forest products from community-based enterprises. And we provide the technical support to develop indigenous businesses, if you will, and help them develop the value chain all the way from community all the way to these companies that are willing to pay this extra value that is very much needed and deserved by indigenous peoples. So there are a number of those companies that we are engaging with, and we are welcoming new companies that would be willing to work with us. But most importantly, willing to work with overcome the constraints that exist in order to get this community-based projects off the ground, understanding that there are different transaction costs, there are issues of quality control, and we work within that space in order to really create a viable economy, because it's only through creating, we believe, creating a strong, resilient indigenous economy over time that will help contribute to decreasing their vulnerability to the unsound economic forces that are encroaching upon their lands. So they will have more options. And the other space of private companies that we work with are companies that are in the space of buying offsets. So we do believe that RED is a positive mechanism provided it is done properly. We believe in jurisdictional RED as we believe in project-based carbon projects as well. So we are in discussions with companies that are already buying. Like I said earlier, we launched the first indigenous RED project, at least that we are aware of, the Surrey project back then. We haven't changed our position in relation to carbon markets. So we believe carbon markets have a positive role as long as they respect indigenous rights, as long as free prior informed consent processes are respected above all.
I was trying to get specifically around demarcation and legal recognition by the government of indigenous land rights. Normally that's NGOs and indigenous communities and governments negotiating. And I haven't seen, I think it's very interesting to embed the private sector in that negotiation process. Is that something that you have seen? Corporations using their legal and advocacy expertise to support indigenous communities in the legal recognition of their land?
No, perhaps something that I said came out the wrong way, but I'm not aware if others are aware of corporations that are investing in the demarcation of indigenous peoples. If anything, corporations continue to be a major threat to the demarcation of indigenous territories, or to even the recognition of indigenous territories already demarcated. In the case of Brazil, currently is a major problem that the government is trying to undermine the demarcations that have already been secured, given the Constitution of 1988. Where companies have a way to support indigenous peoples in their processes of either requests for new demarcations or maintaining their forests that have already been demarcated, is to support their autonomous economies, local economies, by way of investing in ways that are fair, based on free prior informed consent processes. That way they can help strengthen the governance of indigenous territories, because demarcation itself will not resolve, will not protect indigenous lands from being invaded. It's really the rights with governance that is, in the long run, is what's really going to deliver, God willing, the conservation of indigenous lands and the well-being of their people, of indigenous peoples, their good living, or bien vivir, as they say in Spanish. So the private sector has a role in order to help provide the right incentives, even though that word is a tricky word, because indigenous peoples don't need to be incentivized to defend their forests. They've been doing this at the cost of their own lives. But if anything, the private sector can provide markets that are just, that are fair for indigenous people's products. And at the same time, not create perverse incentives that are causing deforestation. But the role of it is up to governments really to uphold their constitutions and respect indigenous people's rights.
Okay, I have one more question. I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about your previous incarnation before Forest Trends and your work on shaman pharmaceuticals, and then just give us a couple of sentences about dragon blood and its commercialization by Jaguar Health.
Yes, well, it's been many years now. I think it was fair to say my previous incarnation. Yeah, I used to work for Shaman Pharmaceuticals here in California. That's where I'm based. At the time continues to be now. They're reinvented themselves. Is called Napo Pharmaceuticals. When I worked with Shaman Pharmaceuticals, I was responsible for sustainable management of bringing the raw product for the dragon's blood. It's a sap from a tree in the Amazon, from the dragon's blood tree, that we did at the time to create a drug to treat HIV diarrhea. It was about to be launched, then the FDA required more clinical studies. We had to switch gears, and it became finally, it was launched as a supplement, dietary supplement, as opposed to a pharmaceutical product. Oh, it was very interesting. I spent 3 years of my work there as manager of sustainable harvesting, working with forest communities to supply the raw material for that particular drug, as well as working with the scientists at the company and indigenous peoples throughout the world in order to identify other plants with bioactive towards given diseases through the science of ethnobotany. That's what we did at the time, and so I'm not sure what else
Great.
still out there. And I think, well, if one thing, I guess when I think of my days back in the labs of Shima Pharmaceuticals, seeing what it's possible and thinking of comparing carbon markets with the potential of true benefits coming from bioprospecting, and sort of coming up with economic incentives based on the conservation of biodiversity or ecosystem services from within, such as biodiversity. I think the biodiversity offers a greater opportunity than carbon markets per se. So because carbon markets in themselves have a finite cycle, whereas biodiversity does not.
Okay, now's the time to open it up to everybody else. Tom, I saw you come off or come on video. Did you have a question? Okay.
Oh, no, I didn't. I was just wanting to make sure you had a face to look at while he was talking. So I appreciate all your presentation, Beto, and very, very informative. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Bobby Kia, you're up first. Please introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Jonah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your presentation, Beto. My name is Bobby Kia, and I'm the co-founder of the Peace Department, formerly the IFC, the World Bank's International Finance Corporation. And my question is in the chat, and it is as follows. If we can bring ultra high net worth investors and other forms of private capital that's flexible, are we able to identify some sustainable business models that can be proven to empower indigenous rights?
Go ahead, Beto.
Yeah, I think that we are, by the way, Forest Friends is not the only organization working in this space, supporting indigenous people's local economies. Them themselves have their own initiatives. COICA, for instance, which is the Pan-Amazonia Indigenous Organization, representing indigenous peoples throughout the Amazon, the Mesoamerican Alliance of Peoples and Forests. I think one way is, to the extent that is possible and their willingness to engage, it's always best to go straight to those organizations to see what programs they have. And I believe they have evolving programs in this space, particularly the Mesoamerican Alliance of Peoples and Forests, given that forestry in Mesoamerica is more advanced than it is in some of these indigenous territories that in the Amazon. And so again, one caveat that is really important is really to understand that working with indigenous people's economic community-based enterprises takes a lot of time to develop in a way that you can really achieve the quality of products in a way that really is in balance with their the cultural integrity and their ways of living, depending on the territories, on the given people. It really varies from community to community. The Instituto Socioambiental, the Social Environmental Institute, already has some really good programs in place. Perhaps, Johnny, you can also share their site here as well. In the Northern Amazon with selling pepper and other products. So there are, I believe, our friends here, Rainforest Alliance, Lars is on the call as well. They are also involved with good community-based programs as well. So it's really there are several organizations that are already working in this space, and we can you can share my email here. I'll be happy to either through us or through our partners, or connect you directly with some of our partners to explore further. But it takes time, it takes a commitment, and really most of all, again, most importantly, is really to respect Indigenous people's autonomy and their free, prior, informed consent processes. Not only, and free, prior, informed consent is not only related to carbon projects, it's related to any engagement that any one of us can have with Indigenous people's organizations, be it to develop a business in order to sell cocoa or Brazil nuts, or be it a project to sell carbon. So they need to be comfortable with what is being expected from them, and one needs to invest the time and resources that are necessary. But I can guarantee you that it's worth it in the end. Anything that can secure their support, their stewardship of their forests is a good investment. I hope that I respond to your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great. Sid Embry.
Hi, yes, thank you. That was a wonderful summary, Beto, and it sounds like you're involved in a lot. I hope you have a team helping you with all of those activities. Yes, I first heard about the Surui project from Jacob Olander, who I've known, gosh, for like 25 years or whatever. But I understand, so have been looking at potential RED investment opportunities throughout the Jaguar corridor, biodiverse corridors in Latin America. And I understand the Surui project was suspended. I don't know if it's been reinstated, but my limited understanding is perhaps that was due to invasions and land grabbing, whether successful or not. And so I've been struggling with, well, wanting obviously to find investment opportunities, working with Indigenous communities, no matter whether it's Amazon or Mosquitia or wherever. But I'm wondering what, like, obviously taking care of the patrimony of the Indigenous communities is important, but what are the practical steps on the ground? Is it, things like bioprospecting and investing in productive activities so that there are people in the properties, in the lands on a regular basis? Or is it more, organized programs such as LEAF? I'm just, I look at other RED properties, even in the Amazon, that are private sector owned, and they're also trying to deal with land grabbing and illegal logging and people coming on their properties. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm just challenged. We would certainly love to, anywhere we're investing, to make additional investments in studies that would benefit communities as well as our fund, to identify, payments for ecosystem services opportunities, bioprospecting, do, species and ecosystem valuations, basically to broaden the range of information and understanding of what's the potential, probably, hopefully identify even unknown as yet opportunities. But I'm still like a little, other than, getting guards, which I really don't like the idea of at all. What can be done to strengthen the guardianship of the patrimony through RED, or maybe it's not just through RED? Sorry to ramble, but I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Sid. Yeah, I do have a team, thanks God, working with me. In fact, Jacob Olander is part of that team. So he's working closely with us. Well, the Surui, beginning with the Surui carbon project, it is on hold. We suspended because of diamond mining that was then found in the territory, which was not part of the methodology. When we developed the methodology, we did design in Brazil, which is one of our partners in Brazil. We were not at all thinking of diamond mining at the time. The methodology was based on, the baseline was based on timber extraction. That was the main reason, really. There were some governance problems as well. In some of the leadership began kind of, there was too much expectation raised, which for us, one of the lessons learned is that FPIC, which is free, prior, informed consent process, doesn't have an end in itself. It has to be continuously revisited. So in order to, keep people engaged and asking the right questions and minimizing and controlling expectations, making them realistic. LEAF, it's an interesting program. I think it's people are really well-intentioned. We have some reservations, we as forest friends and myself included, which is, it's things are happening really fast, and they haven't had the time, really, the governments, to those willing, by the way, and that varies, right, in the spectrum of all the governments that partake into they have, I believe, submitted proposals to the program. The whole process has been rushed. Therefore, they didn't have time to conduct proper consultation with indigenous peoples. Those indigenous peoples that are, meaning through the organizations that everyone that I talked to that have come to us, the great majority are clueless about some, they don't even have a copy of the proposal that was submitted. The Cancun safeguards, I believe points 4 and 5, the Cancun safeguards speak very clearly that RED mechanisms need to involve indigenous peoples and local communities in the architecture of those mechanisms. And to us, then, it's a bit concerning that the program is already this far when proposals are being considered, whereas indigenous peoples didn't have a chance to participate, and local communities didn't have a chance to co-develop those proposals. So then it's subject for a situation where a proposal is approved, and then they will have to present, the jurisdictions, the governments, will have to present some kind of a benefit sharing mechanism, which will in turn establish a percentage that will have been thought out just by the governments without the participation of indigenous peoples. And I think that is one of the, in my understanding, I could be wrong, that's one of the weaknesses of the RED Early Movers program, where the percentage was established without the participation of the stewards, the most important stewards of the forest. So somehow they will have to correct that in the process. That's what we hope. We think, we're glad LEAF is here, because more finance is needed to control deforestation. But they need to sort of correct the path a little bit in relation to the engagement of indigenous peoples. And my email is here. There are some things that we can talk more, offline. So in order to other people here to ask questions if they want, but this is complex. Again, we believe that indigenous peoples don't really need, I think nesting indigenous peoples carbon projects is one way, but I don't think it's the only way. I think indigenous people should have their own right to engage with a company, because we believe that they have the carbon ownership rights to their territories. It varies, the interpretation varies from country to country, but at least in Brazil, the time of the Surui project, we hire is a big word, but pro bono almost, we paid a little bit towards Baker McKenzie, which did a 6 months review of all the legal frameworks of the Brazilian laws, and concluded that indigenous peoples in Brazil do have carbon ownership rights, at least for what it concerns Brazil, where I believe most of the Brazilian Amazon states submitted proposals to LEAF. They will have to come up with terms with that. Who determines the percentage of benefit sharing when indigenous peoples themselves have the rights to the carbon in their territories? And here we're talking about 15 to 17% of the Brazilian land mass belongs to them.
If somebody could post a link to that Baker McKenzie study, that would be great. Next up is Lars.
Hi, Beto. Thank you. That was a very good presentation. You're focusing in on a lot of very, very important issues like, cultural sustainability, economic opportunities, building resilience, and all that stuff. I was just wondering, since we're sort of 15 people here, a small group, and with your 15 years with Forest Trends and 30 years working on the issues, we all know that not always indigenous peoples are really giving priority to long-term sustainability. Economic gain in the short term is very attractive. And I wondered if you could share some of Forest Trends' experience in dealing with those issues. In a sense, how long do you work with people who don't give the same priority to sustainability as you ideally would like them to do? Do you have a policy for choosing which communities to work with? And maybe give some insights into sort of what you consider like the key aspects or elements for success in the long run. Difficult question and a bit tricky, but I know you can answer it.
Thank you, Lars. I'm sure you're dealing with the same question in your mind over the years, and this is indeed a challenge because there is we don't want to be in the place of romanticizing, right? That indigenous peoples are all they are. We believe that for the most part they are the true stewards. You just look at the stats, right? And most of the forests that are still intact is because indigenous peoples are there. However, it doesn't mean that all indigenous peoples think the same way. In fact, one of the problems that we had with this Carbon project was because some didn't think the same way. Some of their leaders wanted to continue to sell wood to the illegal loggers. And the same is true from territory to territory. So, but what we do, it's human nature, I would say. I don't think indigenous peoples are any different than we are in terms of, being attracted to and sometimes illusioned by the power of capital, right? And sometimes they perhaps not wanting to be paternalistic, but sometimes they're manipulated by some, unsound business interests, and we've seen that happening. The way that we go about it, Lars, is that we have this, and I believe if you haven't yet, my friend Jonah, if you can please copy and paste the link to our capacity building training program that we have, the video that we have. We have this capacity building training program, which is a 1-year long program that we developed in conjunction with some indigenous organizations as well as local universities. The sort of the methodology and the curricula for that, as opposed to 2 weeks workshops, we work a whole year. And we meet every other month in presence at the local level. The selection for those participating is very participatory, and you can see in the video that will tell you more about it. But essentially, we work with the indigenous community, mostly community associations that partake in those trainings, really to think through what really money represents. And what is the power of money? How can money be an instrument for the integrated governance of their territories? How can money can provide a collective benefit rather than benefiting one person versus the other? And really working through a long time with them in order to, and where we're developing most of our hands-on economic projects have been in the Tupi Mosaic and also in the state of Acre in Brazil, where we've been working for 15, 20 years with selected indigenous territories. We already have the relationship, and we've addressed some of these issues years ago. And we are making progress in terms of, because they're starting to see the benefits of working towards the common good as opposed to benefited individually. But from time to time, there are those that, for instance, oh no, I want to sell my Brazil nuts to outside of this co-op because I'm going to make more money with that. And ultimately, it's their decision. So as far as a policy, we don't necessarily have a policy on paper, but our practice is that if we don't see that there is a community consensus wherein there is a good representation of the community from elders, women, and youth and leaders together, driving a given economic enterprise. In time, we stop working with them over time. To a certain extent, that also played a role in the Surui project because they started to disagree with one another, and we said, well, okay, here's as far as we can go. The methodology can be revamped. We think there is still a chance there, but ultimately it's in their hands if they really want to take that project and any other economic development project with indigenous peoples. So they're the ones that need to agree to work for the collective as a whole, as opposed to individual benefits. My best answer at this time, my friend. I would be intrigued to hear how you go about it. It's could learn a lot from you guys as well on this topic, as in others.
You can respond, Lars.
Long-term engagement is essential, insisting on participation as Beto did. So that broad participation, I mean, he mentioned the youth, women, and we see in many indigenous community that very strong, influential, smart individuals are able to actually benefit themselves to the irritation of the community, but not to the sanction of the community. So one has to be quite knowledgeable and willing to also be very unpopular.
Good. Great wisdom sharing. I have one question that might take us to the top of the hour. Others are also welcome to come on. Beto, thinking about pre-existing supply chains and consumer networks, here in the United States, as an author, you used to make it if Oprah Winfrey brought you onto her show. I want to ask about the bioeconomy aggregators, as I call them, Canopy Bridge, Tucum, and Origins Brazil. Do we just need more celebrities to tweet about consumption of indigenous goods? Is doubling the consumption, over the next 6 months, an important and priority pathway that global civil society and allies on these phone calls could pursue or should pursue?
Not necessarily. I think that the solution is not just in really boosting indigenous economies to the point that they become commodities, so that indigenous people, if we were to do that, we would probably have a detrimental impact on indigenous people's territories. Because, again, like I said, at least for us, we think that it's important to strike the right balance between their traditional economies with the market economy. We don't want their traditional economy to be destroyed because all of a sudden they have to produce, 100 tons of a month of cocoa to the marketplace because Oprah said it's the greatest thing after sliced bread. So we don't. I think what Oprah can do, given her audience, is to have people rethink how we consume. And also consume less, consume products of a high quality, and invest. The market, I think, needs to have the the will and investment capacity to develop these markets with indigenous peoples that take time, and the time that it takes is to find again to strike this right balance. Okay, what is the elasticity of supply that indigenous people's economic enterprises can have, to the extent that they will not destroy their traditional economy, the traditional economy of exchange, the traditional economy of, I fish, I give you my fish, and you help me with, with my cassava cultivar. So that cannot be destroyed, because if the market, all this bioeconomy that everybody talks about, nature-based solutions that everybody talks about. If that becomes a new encroachment, unsolved encroachment upon indigenous lands, then we will have failed. I wish I had a silver bullet for Oprah to just announce, and I think this is in the making, but the more we come as a society thinking, what are the ways that we can partner with indigenous peoples to recognize their rights, to recognize that perhaps they have a better way, if not a better way, but a complementary way of living on this planet, to not consuming so much resources. Perhaps we can come up with a better way of, looking upon indigenous societies, indigenous social structures. How do they relate to one another? How do they take care of their elderly? How they teach their youngsters? It's not all about the market. It's about a change of paradigm.
Great. Not great. Sorry. What amazing wisdom. I celebrate it. This is a perfect moment for it, for the whole world to see it. We're at the top of the hour, and this is where you probably know we convert to water cooler time and class is dismissed, but people are welcome to hang around. Do you have a few more minutes to spend time with us, Beto?
I do, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining, and ta-da, now's time for unstructured conversation.
Thank you all so much. Greetings.
If anyone else has any other questions or shameless self-promotion or whatever it may be, this is your moment.
I just sent Sid Embry a LinkedIn message in case she's interested in exploring Venezuela. I know it's kind of off the grid, but there are interesting opportunities there.
Great, how exciting.
Yes, Beto, I maybe you can confirm that. Great presentation, by the way. Really appreciated you take. In Ecuador, the communities that I'm involved with have told me that they receive about $165 every 6 months from the Red Plus scheme. Is it the number that you've encountered as well? That little money?
It looks awkward. 165 every 6 months in exchange of what? It could be a small project. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. It's person will receive from the RED scheme in Ecuador. Maybe, well, there is in Ecuador, they have the Socio Bosque program.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yes.
Okay. It could be, depending, one person receiving $165 every 6 months. I'm not familiar, Mark, with the details of Socio Bosque to that extent. It's plausible that they have, to the extent that I remember, they don't have individual payments, but they invest more in programs, but it could be that I'm misinformed. So, we think that a benefit sharing program would be, doesn't necessarily need to, or I perhaps wouldn't be the wisest to make individual payments. Because we've seen, for instance, and that wasn't even an individual payment when I was very much involved in the state of Acre in Brazil on this indigenous soup program where it channeled funds from the Red Early Movers program. Some of the allocations were really paid out to indigenous organizations, but used the money really for emergency projects that they had, which were all very much in need. But in order for us to really have a systemic impact of what is really needed, I'm not passing judgment. I'm sure this person that received this money, benefited from it. But what I'm talking about is that programs, RAD programs and other carbon programs and other biodiversity payment programs, they need to really be invested in terms of the benefit sharing aspect of it in a more integrated approach, in a more systemic approach that really takes the territory and the well-being, the livelihoods of the given community as a whole, as opposed to an individual sort of payment to a person, because that could be taken completely out of hand, depending on the circumstances.
I-
But
I-
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, and it's probably the trickle down effect of going first to the Ecuadorian government, then the Sociobosque program, then to indigenous organizations, and then split it towards communities, and communities do whatever they want with the money eventually. But the what I see very often in terms of when you speak of programs. It is very often something that is forced upon indigenous communities to adopt. And unfortunately, it does have its own, problems down the line where when we speak, for instance, you had that experience with shaman pharmaceuticals, right? And there was strong accusations of biopiracy. And it tends to follow a very similar type of mechanism, whereas it is something that is forced upon. And if it doesn't work, if the indigenous organizations reject that, which happened also with Red Plus in Ecuador, then they tend to move towards more friendly or more needy, I would say, indigenous communities.
Agreed. That's why it's important to respect the free prior informed consent and for it to be a collective, ownership of by the community. That's at least was the practice, even though there was some criticism. There's always going to be present. Some is fair, some perhaps not so much. At the time of Chairman Pharmaceutical, the exchanges were based on FPIC, which didn't even was called as such back then. And the programs that exist now, they all need to be evaluated from the standpoint of whether communities have been consulted, what type of consultation took place, were the legitimate representative leadership of those communities at the forefront of those negotiations. So I think it's a good way to evaluate the existing programs that exist. And like I said, unfortunately, I think LEAF needs to correct its course in relation to that, so that doesn't fall prey to the same problems that other well-intentioned programs have found. All right. Well, now I just look at the clock and I remember that I have a meeting that I'm already 5 minutes late for.
Thanks so much for
So
joining us.
sorry. Yeah.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise, please, I will look forward to continue to be in touch through LinkedIn. We can be connected through there and also through email. And thank you again, Jonah, for this opportunity. So it's a lot to share. I think I kind of rushed through it, but I hope I managed to share some of our work with you all.
You did great. Thanks so much.
It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sid. Thank you all. Okay, Jonah, take it easy. Bye now.
Stop recording.
Okay, hold on.